reading what Kurt Vonnegut used to call a grand falloon. A grand falloon was a meaningless abstraction in which you put things together that don't belong together. You see, national security, and national interest. No, there's no one national interest. There's the interest of the President of the United States, and then the interest of the young person he sends to war. They're different interests, you see. No, there's the interest of Exxon and Halliburton, and there's the interest of the worker, the nurse's aide, the teacher, the factory worker. Those are different interests. Once you recognize that you and the government have different interests, that's a very important step forward in your thinking, because if you think you have a common interest with the government, well, then it means that if the government says you must do this and you must do that, and it's a good idea to go to war here, well, the government is looking out for my interest. No, the government is not looking out for your interest. The government has its own interests, and they're not the interests of the people. Not just true in the United States, it's true everywhere in the world. Governments generally do not represent the interests of their people. See? That's why governments keep getting overthrown. Because people at a certain point realize, hey, no, the government is not serving my interest. That's also why governments lie. Why do governments lie? And you must know that governments lie. Not just our government, governments in general lie. Why do they lie? They have to lie, because their interests are different than the interests of ordinary people. If they told the truth, they would be out of office. So, have to recognize, that the difference in interest. And I have to say something about war. A little more than I've said. And what I say about them, because I've emphasized the importance of renouncing war and not being a war-making nation. And because it will not be enough to get us out of Iraq. One of these days we'll get out of Iraq. We have to get out of Iraq. We don't belong there, and we're going to have to get out of there. Sooner or later, we're going to have to get out of there. But we don't want to get out of Iraq and then have to get out of somewhere else. We don't have to get out of Iraq but keep troops in Afghanistan, as unfortunately Obama said, troops in Afghanistan. No more, not just Iraq. We have to get into a mindset about renouncing sort of war, period, and which is a big step. And my ideas about war, my thoughts about war, the conclusions that I've come to about war, they really come from two sources. One, from my study of history. Of course, not everybody who studies history comes to the same conclusions. But, you have to listen to various people who study history and decide what makes more sense, right? I've looked at various histories. I've concluded that my history makes more sense. I've always been an objective student of these things, yes. But my ideas about war come from two sources. One of them is studying history, the history of wars, the history of governance, the history of empires. That history helps a lot in straightening out your thinking. And the other is my own experience in war. And I was in World War II. I was an Air Force bombardier. I dropped bombs on various cities in Europe. That doesn't make me an expert. Lots of people were in wars, and they all come out with different opinions. Well, so all I can do is give you my opinion, based on my thinking after having been in a war. I was an enthusiastic enlistee in the Air Force. I wanted to be in a war against fascism, the good war, right? But at the end of the war, as I looked around and surveyed the world and thought about what I had done, and thought about and learned about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and learned about Dresden, and learned about Hamburg, and learned things I didn't even realize while I was bombing. Because when you're involved in a military operation, you don't think. You just, you're an automaton, really. You may be a well-educated and technically competent automaton, but that's what you aren't really, you're not questioning. Not questioning why are they sending me to bomb this little town? The war is almost over. There's no reason for dropping bombs on several thousand people. No, you don't think. Well, I began to think after the war. I began to think that, and I was thinking now about the good war, the best war. And I was thinking, and then I began to see, no, this good war is not simply good. This best of wars, no. And if it's true of this war, imagine what is true of all the other obviously ugly wars about which you can't even use the word good. Yeah, and I began to realize certain things, that war corrupts everybody. Corrupts everybody who engages in it. You start off, they're the bad guys. You make an interesting psychological jump. The jump is this: since they're the bad guys, you must be the good guys. No. They may very well be the bad guys. They may be fascists and dictators and bad, really bad guys. That doesn't mean you're good, And when I began to look at it that way, I realized that wars are fought by, by evils on both sides.